Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Now, starting in 2024, young men in Taiwan will have to serve in the military for 1 year. At the moment, it's 4 months of mandatory service. Now, the issue of conscription is a hot topic, especially with rising tensions with China. And so, after Russia invaded Ukraine, Taiwan's defense capabilities became even more of a focal point. And along with that came the question of whether women should face mandatory military service. So, to discuss this further, we will be going to New York and connecting with Elizabeth Shim. And here in Taipei, we'll be connecting with Li-yi Chen. First, let me start with you, Elizabeth. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're connected to this topic.
Thank you. I'm a former journalist. I reported from the Seoul Bureau of the Associated Press, and then for about 7 years, I reported for United Press International, or UPI, covering North and South Korea. I'm currently working on a book about North Korea, and I hope to discuss that in more detail later. Thank you.
Great to hear from you, Elizabeth. Now, Lee, I know you have a very corporate day job, but you also have another purpose, which is part of an association called Taiwan Militia, a very provocative name, I'll say. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
First of all, it's our honor to be on the show. Taiwan Militia Association was founded in 2020. By a group of patriots, let's call them that way. We believe that there is a very high risk that is going to happen, and that is the war. And so we need to get prepared. And while we were doing our research, we realized that, of course, national defense is important, but in general, the civilian disaster preparedness against the war has been, and still is, very much lacking. So now our focus, although our name suggests that everybody in our organization wants to serve in the military and take have some kind of form of weapon to fight, which we do have that intention if it's needed, but now our focus is more on, again, the disaster preparedness part.
When we talk about preparedness, there is a conversation about women, particularly in the military, and the mandatory service that's required for men. Do you think women should also face conscription here in Taiwan, Li?
I think it would be a great idea because one thing that I believe in, our organization believes in, is that experience teaches you more than just knowledge. So once women have more chances to contribute in national defense or any kinds of defense, they will get a better sense of what the potential threats going to be and what they can do. And I think that will help a lot in general.
How about you, Elizabeth? Would you be open to being conscripted for, I'm not sure if you're still a South Korean national, but would you be open to being conscripted? And what's the general feeling in South Korea?
There's actually been an increasing number of women in South Korean women serving in Seoul's armed forces without a conscription policy in place. So I think what's been happening in South Korea regarding women in the military is that this is taking place organically. So just kind of examining that phenomenon, you can make the case for voluntary rather than conscription service. Women, by 2016, women were making up 5.5% of the senior military ranks. And more women are entering the armed forces. I can understand arguments for conscription, but right now this is not an issue. This is not a priority for South Korea right now. The greater priority around women and women's issues is the declining fertility rate, and there remains, questions about, military service further interfering with a woman's ability to start a family. They need better opportunities, economic opportunities, and career paths that make it more viable for them to start families. And whether or not a conscription system for women could help that or deter that remains up for debate.
You bring up a very interesting point there. Taiwan also has a declining fertility rate. Is that going to be a factor in whether women should be conscripted, do you think?
Fertility rate? I actually thought about it as a potential reason to be against conscription. But I think men are also very important in starting a family, right? Of course, women bear
We'd
children.
like to think, yes.
Yeah. So I don't think if raising a family. Well, I do believe that having families and creating next generations of Taiwanese is super important. But it requires every man and woman to do that. So I would say that is why that is pretty much the reason. One of the main reasons that why anybody is against any kind of conscription on anybody is because of the conscription might interfere with them raising a family and having a great career and things like that. So
at the same time, when it comes to defending a nation, you do need a healthy, large population always helps. I mean, look at China. But let me take you to one country which has managed to balance and make it part of the national psyche that it's every civilian's responsibility to defend a nation, and that is Israel. So women and men in Israel, they face mandatory conscription. For women, it's 24 months and 32 months for men. We spoke to Mor Sobel. He also did his military service in Israel, and now he's an associate professor in diplomacy at Tamkang University. And we asked him about his take on what works in Israel and whether Taiwan should follow suit.
David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, refused to call the new force the help female force, and saying, no, women do not help, women do not support, women has the duty to defend the state of Israel just like men, right? So at the beginning, women did have only supportive roles, but slowly, women have more and more opportunities in the Israeli army. Sometimes they had to fight their way in, and now the situation is much better than before. And I think that in the context of Taiwan, women do have the duty to serve. I don't see any problem of including women in the Taiwanese military. I think that as an organization, it will be even better and more beneficial to include more women.
So Li, I see you nodding there, and he seems to be thinking along the same lines of what you've been expressing. Do you think it should come from the messaging of the government? That should be the message from the government, and then people will accept it? Is that the way this should happen?
It's I don't think it will happen that way in Taiwan. In Taiwan, the more likely scenario in my mind would be something like, oh, China drops their first bomb somewhere in Taiwan or close to Taiwan, and people start to realize, oh, this is really happening. This is not just a threat. Then the society, it will be a more practical debate for everyone. Right now, I think it's no issue. It's not an issue that we can even discuss about, like in a practical sense, because there's so few people that want to discuss about that, and there's also not so many. There are also not so many people are interested in this topic in general. I think it may seem like for international media, this may seem like a big issue, but just ask You just sample some random Taiwanese on the streets and ask them, hey, do you know anything? Do you believe that there's going to be a war in Taiwan? Have you heard of any kind of civilian disaster preparedness or national defense efforts organized by the people? I would say most people would tell you no, and they don't believe that the war is going to happen, period. I just sampled my dentist and the dentist assistant at the dentist's office an hour ago, and that confirmed what I just said.
That's great research there, Elizabeth. Do you think in South Korea, if the messaging came from the government, people are more likely to listen and suddenly feel that urgency?
I think that would be a major development if there was a top-down order or call for like some kind of executive order to begin a conscription service that resembles the current, mandatory military service that requires men to serve for about 20 months. That would be a major change. It would be initially perceived as incredibly disruptive to civilian life for women. And I would not be surprised if there was some strong opposition to it, including from women's groups.
Right. So speaking of women's group and the issues women face across the world, here's another bite from Moore Sobel, and he raises a fundamental issue that's faced in militaries around the world, globally, not just in Asia, but all over the world.
Unfortunately, the military is a masculine and traditional organization. Yeah, so Taiwan, much like what Israel did and still doing, Taiwan or the Taiwanese army needs to change the mindset of the people, of the officers, of the senior leadership towards the understanding that it is good for the organization to include women in the service, even in combat roles. So this is on one level. The other level, and similar to the Israeli case, the push needs to come also from the Taiwanese women. Yeah, they have to demand to be included in the service, and that also means maybe even taking legal steps, just like Israeli women did, in order not to be discriminated in the roles that they could have in the Taiwanese military.
Li, do you think Taiwanese women will actually take legal action to be counted in the army?
Well, first of all, I do agree that the two criteria that the professor mentioned should be there. But I would say both criteria would not be met until like the day the first bomb drops. People don't feel that in general, people don't feel like that's a reality. So I would say, of course, yeah, those are very important, super important, but that's not gonna happen.
So Elizabeth, this is where I bring you in and the book you're writing at the moment, which has to do with North Korea. And part of the reason I want to talk about this is the fact that the Koreas are technically still in a state of war. There has still not been a peace treaty, but at the same time, just like in Taiwan, as Li is mentioning, you still don't feel that urgency. So the premise of your book has to do with what is happening in North Korea. Can you explain a little more and explain why or whether or not that lends to the fact that South Korea should be looking at the situation with more urgency and taking more action, or whether the current attitude and the status quo is the right way to go?
I mean, I think there should always be readiness on the part of the South Korean military and the South Korean nation for a possible breakout of war. But miscalculations of North Korean intentions are just as dangerous, if not more, and that is the premise of my book, which goes into what we see every day on our television screens when it comes to North Korea. I think most people around the world only hear about North Korea when they launch a missile or test a nuclear weapon. And these are kind of the images that North Korea sends out to the world. These are the permissible images of North Korea. And my book is based on my journalism, my years-long journalism covering North Korea. And I'm really asking the question of, well, why are we getting these images, but not the images of everyday life in North Korea right now?
Right. You bring up an important point about readiness, Elizabeth. So Li, you're going to recognize some of the vision we're going to play here. We filmed this at one of the training sessions of Taiwan militia that took place in Dan Park, Central Park here in Taipei. It's one of the groups, and I want to mention it's one of many groups that do this here, that organize defense sessions. Li, if you can see this vision, can you explain what's happening or what they're doing there?
It's actually one of our pilot runs self-defense ideas. We hired a colleague trainer to help us understand just some basics about self-defense and observing the threats in the environment. This is very preliminary. That was actually our second class. And there are only 2 classes. And just a small note. There aren't a lot of groups that are doing this for the purpose of disaster preparedness and civil defense. There are, of course, a lot of martial arts centers all over Taipei, but doing it for our purpose, I would say there are very few groups.
All right, and we spoke to some people that were on the ground doing this training, and here's what they had to say.
Not long after I started attending, the war in Ukraine happened. And then I saw on the news how older Ukrainians were willing to fight because they wanted to protect their land for the young. This resonates with me deeply because whenever I look at my sister's little kids, I feel we have to do something for them.
Most of the people coming to the training worry about political tensions in the world, and they want to learn some self-defense. When facing earthquakes in the future and the threats from China, being able to protect oneself is a fundamental skill. So let's learn. Women have their strengths. When people see women, they don't think we are much of a threat. If you drop the stick at today's training, you need to do 10 push-ups. I was maybe the first woman to drop it today, and people didn't think I could do it. But because I've been working out regularly, 10 push-ups is nothing to me. So I think women can use their advantages.
I've been teaching martial arts for 10 years. I find that female students tend to work harder. Many male students, probably because they are men, want to use brute force to do the moves. But women know that they are not as strong, so they will try to come up with a better way to do martial arts. That's probably the main difference between them.
Elizabeth, I want to get you to react to this. What did you think when you were watching these people in training and listening to their thoughts on being able to equip themselves should there be some kind of conflict?
I think it's admirable that you can become a part of a community that believes that can unite around a single cause. It seems to be, kind of like a way to, reconnect with members of your community, especially after the pandemic. At the same time, I see how grave the situation could potentially be for Taiwan in the event of an attack, which at this point is frankly unimaginable. But given just the many reasons why there has not been an attack for decades. But yes, that's my initial reaction. But very interesting.
Right. Go on, Li.
Yeah, can I have a question for Elizabeth? Just from my, just out of my own curiosity. So with this book that you're going to launch, what kind of impact do you wish to create? And my second question would be, as an would I say like an overseas Korean? Can I call you that way? Do you have any, I would say, mixed feelings in terms of, in case of a war, whether you need to be in Korea to help with the cause, or you should stay somewhere else, and like in the United States to help get assistance. I don't know. Just want to know your thoughts on that.
Right. I mean, I think I speak mostly for myself, but most overseas Koreans, including myself, we don't live overseas to avoid war. And again, the idea of war is so far on the horizon, it does not affect how we migrate or live, whether it's overseas or in Korea. Those possible threats do not dictate our personal decisions. In terms of the book and launching the book, I don't know who will read it. I think there'll be just a very small circle of people who are interested in North Korea that might pick it up. But my primary goal with the book is to provide a new and different perspective about North Korea beyond the headlines. So if I do that, if I can move the needle on that, I would feel it would have been worth the effort.
Okay, so going back to one of the points both of you made, it's about overseas nationals or citizens watching what's happening in their country. And we have Irina, she's a young Ukrainian living in Taipei, and she's also a member of a volunteer group, Divchata Power, which is raising funds for Ukraine. And these are her feelings on what is happening in her home country and on women soldiers.
In my opinion, women take a big part in like defense system, for sure. And that's kind of what we aiming for our next fundraising project. We're gonna help women on the front lines because there's a lot of women soldiers that are defending our country. I don't see like those roles like men are defenders and women maybe should stay home and, I don't know, take care of the children. In my opinion, if women have her kids, maybe it's not a good idea to go to the war because, well, kids need a mother. But if there is opportunity, I think there is no problem with women going and defending the country as well, because why not? I think still in Ukraine, we have the sexist parts that should have been resolved earlier. So I'm pretty happy that it's changing now. I think the dynamic between men and women will change after the war for sure.
I want to take this question to you, Li. I mean, one of the major issues across the globe is women are often second-class citizens and have fewer choices than their male counterparts. And to suddenly say that women should do mandatory conscription in a world that already is tilted towards men suddenly becomes another thing that women have to do on top of all the other things they have, responsibilities they have, as Alina said, bringing up children and being kind of the main caregiver, and then on top of that being called up for the army. Do you think that that should be taken into consideration? Would that make you say, okay, in that case, mandatory conscription should not be there for women?
Well, I think it's an egg and hen issue. I don't know if it's how people call it in English. The reason why women feel disadvantaged nowadays is very much because they feel like their value is not, or our value is not being recognized. We pay a lot. We pay a lot for what we do, but we don't get something in return, right? But you have to think about the ultimate what is the ultimate sacrifice? The ultimate sacrifice is life. So in the past, because of the continuous wars around the world, a lot of men pay that ultimate sacrifice for their countries. It's because we have this long period of peacetime. Men didn't have not had the chance to die because of the war. women feel like men are not doing much, and whereas we're doing a lot. So I think that's why I think if anybody, I wouldn't just limit this topic to men or women, the gender thing. I would say if any disadvantaged group want to fight for more rights, of course they need to give more. I understand that people would say, oh, it's not fair, they're already disadvantaged. But let's not look at fairness based on what we have now. Let's look at fairness about how much, about the choice that we can have, how much contribution we can, at this point of time, that we can add to the society. And I think if you do contribute, then whoever contributes will get more in return.
Thank you very much. We'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. That was a great conversation. Thank you both for your insight, your opinions, and your very valid points you made. Li-yi Chen, great to have you here in Taipei. Elizabeth Shim, thanks for staying up for us in New York. Appreciate both your time. And that's all we have time for this episode. To our viewers, thank you so much for your company. It's been great to have you with us. And do remember to stay connected with Taiwan Plus.